Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the movie Invasion. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. It's the best way to support me. Also, don't forget to like this video if you enjoy this kind of content. Let's get started. The movie begins with the crash of a space shuttle. There's a lot of buzz surrounding the event, and the shuttle debris is completely cordoned off. Later in the evening, an expert from the CDC, Tucker Kaufman, arrives at the scene. The military informs him that the debris has become a source of contamination, and the zone of infection with some kind of alien pathogen could extend up to 300 kilometers. The virus is extremely resilient, capable of surviving both extreme heat and cold. As Kaufman leaves the headquarters, a little girl runs up to him and hands him a piece of the shuttle's hull, saying, "Sir, this fell on our roof." Without thinking, he takes it in his hand, but immediately throws it away after cutting his finger. When Kaufman gets home, his dog greets him, but suddenly runs off, growling. He goes to bed, and while sleeping, his body becomes covered in some sort of membrane. We are then introduced to the main protagonist, Carol, who works as a psychologist. While at work, she gets a call from her ex-husband, Tucker Kaufman, the same expert who now looks completely normal after the night's events. He tells her he wants to see Oliver, their son, but she refuses. Carol drops Oliver off at school and gets into a car with Ben, a friend of hers who is a scientist and clearly has feelings for her. He tells her he's sure that the authorities are hiding something. At work, Carol meets with one of her older clients, who shares a troubling story about her husband. She says that her husband has changed dramatically, that he's no longer himself. He forced her to drink something and even killed their dog simply because it barked at him. Carol prescribes her medication and asks her to call if anything like this happens again. Later that evening, Carol and her friend take their kids trick-or-treating for Halloween. At one point, a dog attacks one of the boys, but the boy doesn't even flinch and nearly kills the dog in response. Carol notices something strange about the child, but the boy's mother insists it's nothing serious. Oliver screams, asking Carol to take off something disgusting that stuck to him. She removes a strange piece of skin and takes it to Ben for examination. They analyze it and realize that similar samples have been found in other countries. Meanwhile, a meeting is held to address the containment of the new virus. Present at the meeting are members of the presidential administration, various experts, and Carol's ex-husband, Tucker Kaufman. Waiters serve coffee to the attendees, into which they regurgitate some strange liquid. Meanwhile, Kaufman explains that the best way to combat the new virus is through vaccination. Someone questions how he could have prepared a vaccine so quickly for a virus that was just discovered. The chairman responds that there's no time to delve into scientific details. Carol notices a man on the street who suddenly collapses. Back at her office, the husband of one of her clients is waiting in the lobby. He's acting strangely and says he'll wait for his wife. However, his wife doesn't have an appointment that day. Carol calls the client and sees that she's on her way. The woman seems nervous and says she needs to talk to Carol. When Carol tells her that her husband is sitting in the lobby, the client abruptly decides not to come in. Carol drives her son to his father's house, but on the way, a frantic woman runs into the street, begging for help. She screams that they're among us and pleads for someone to warn people. Suddenly, she's hit by a car driven by a man who seems off. The arriving policeman appears to be the same. Carol's ex-husband, Kaufman, takes Oliver into his care while Carol goes to dinner with Ben and tells him what happened. Meanwhile, Oliver plays with a neighbor's boy and says that something is wrong with his dad. The other boy admits the same. Oliver's father gives him hot chocolate, clearly intending to infect him. At the dinner party, Carol meets an eccentric Russian diplomat named Yuri. They have an engaging conversation about how, despite all of humanity's achievements, people remain primitive at heart and are capable of committing terrible acts under the right circumstances. After dinner, Carol and Ben drive back home, and outside her house, Ben kisses Carol. However, she asks him to stay friends. Later at night, a strange man visits Carol's home. He introduces himself as a census worker and says he has a few questions to ask her. She realizes something is wrong because it's the middle of the night. She tells the man at her door that she will answer his questions when she gets back, speaking to him through the door. Suddenly, he starts banging on the door with a crazed look in his eyes. However, he eventually gives up and leaves calmly. Carol calls Ben, and he comes over to spend the night with her. The next morning, Ben tries to impress impress her by making pancakes. As she goes outside, she notices more and more infected people. She starts to piece everything together and suspects that people are losing their minds because of the virus. At work, her secretary tries to infect her by bringing her tea, but she doesn't get the chance. Carol calls Ben and tells him about what his friend in the lab discovered. They explain that the virus cells only activate after the host falls asleep. Even if someone is infected, they will only turn into a zombie after they sleep. Researchers at the Fort Detrick lab hypothesize that the virus is an intelligent, advanced organism made up of only a few cells. It integrates its DNA into the human genome, reprogramming the host's DNA overnight. At that moment, Ludmila from the Czech embassy calls, saying something terrible is happening to Yuri. They rush to her, finding Yuri asleep and covered in slime. They decide to take samples and record everything on camera. Carol photographs Yuri using the camera's flash, which wakes him up. He attacks her, but then releases her and dies convulsing, as his transformation into a zombie was not fully complete. Panicked, Carol drives to her ex-husband's house to get her son, only to realize that her ex-husband is one of them. Her husband and his infected friends tell her she won't even notice the changes when she wakes up, and they infect her. However, her son is not in the house, so she leaves, realizing she now can't afford to fall asleep. Out in the streets, the number of infected has grown overwhelmingly. She tries to flee on foot, abandoning her car, but the entire city is already overrun. Her son sends her a message telling her where to find him. In the subway, she encounters others who have figured out that they need to suppress their emotions to avoid detection. However, this doesn't save them, and only Carol manages to escape. She kills one of the infected as she fights to survive. Outside, the infected are actively hunting down uninfected people. Carol tries to keep her emotions in check. A man standing nearby notices that she's sweating and warns her to leave quickly, as they will recognize her. Failing to find her son at home, she goes to Ben and his friend. After discussing the situation, they decide to head to Fort Detrick, 200 kilometers from Washington, where they've been promised safety. However, Carol refuses to leave without her son. She and Ben set out to find him. On the way, they see Carol's former client being detained by the police. She shouts to them that she has already slept but does not seem infected. Intrigued by this, they head to Carol's office, where they learn from Wendy's story that she once suffered from encephalitis. This condition was a complication after chickenpox, specifically a rare form called acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, ADEM, which affects the brain's white matter rather than its gray matter. Carol recalls that her son also had chickenpox last year. Although he was vaccinated, the illness was caused by a new strain of chickenpox, and he was diagnosed with the same ADEM in the hospital. They inform Fort Detrick about their discovery, where a vaccine against the infection is being developed and tested. At this moment, Carol receives a text message on her phone from Oliver, telling her he is in Baltimore at Tucker's mother's house. Ben helps her break through the military cordon and stays in Washington, while she takes the train to Baltimore. On the train, she encounters Oliver's friend, who is also infected. He tells her that his mother failed to transform and died. He offers her to sleep, and she pretends to agree, faking her transformation by covering herself with a film she found in the restroom. At the station, her ex-husband Tucker meets her, and they drive to his mother's house. When Carol enters Oliver's room, they stare at each other for a while, trying to figure out if either of them is infected. Realizing they are both uninfected, they embrace. But at that moment, the boy from the train enters the room and sees that neither of them has changed. Carol pushes him and he loses consciousness. She and Oliver escape the house and hide in a semi-basement. However, Tucker finds them, and during a struggle, Carol kills him with a hammer. They then run into a pharmacy where Carol finds adrenaline and explains to Oliver how to use it. In a storage room, she discovers infected people sleeping. She takes a gun from a sleeping police officer and locks the infected inside. While they wait for Ben, Carol falls asleep and begins to transform. However, Oliver injects her with adrenaline directly into her heart, waking her up and stopping the transformation. Ben arrives and Carol is horrified to realize that he has changed. Ben unlocks the storage room, releasing the infected. When Ben tries to catch her, Carol kills all the infected and injures Ben in the leg. A chase ensues as the infected pursue Carol and her son. They are rescued by Dr. Galliano, who arrives in a helicopter. The news reports show the vaccination of the population through water and food, as well as spraying the vaccine from helicopters. Dr. Galliano gives an interview explaining that the virus has been eradicated and that those who recovered remember nothing, perceiving what happened as a dream. This is where the movie ends. Write in the comments what you thought of it. Give it a rating from 1 to 10, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It's the best support for me. Also, click the notification bell to watch videos first.